Have you ever stopped to think about the most dangerous room inside a medieval castle? Most people would probably say the dungeon, or maybe the battlefield beyond the walls. But what if the answer was something far more ordinary? What if one of the most dangerous places in the entire castle was the toilet? At first, that sounds ridiculous. After all, how dangerous could using the bathroom possibly be? But imagine this. It's the middle of the night. You wake up because nature calls. The castle is completely silent. Outside, the wind howls against the stone walls. Inside, every hallway is swallowed by darkness. There are no electric lights, no glowing lanterns lining the corridors, no warm bathroom just a few steps away. You light a single candle. Its tiny flame pushes back the darkness just enough for you to see where you're walking. One wrong step could send hot wax onto your hand. One strong gust could blow the flame out completely. Yet you have no choice but to keep moving. The stone floor beneath your feet is freezing. Every footstep echoes through the empty castle. The deeper you walk, the quieter everything becomes. Eventually, you stop in front of a narrow wooden door built into the outer wall of the castle. Nothing about it looks unusual. No warning. No sign that this small room is any different from the others. You push the door open. Inside, there isn't much to see. Just a simple wooden seat. A cold stone wall. And beneath that seat, a dark hole disappearing straight down into the castle itself. You can't see the bottom. Your candlelight never reaches it. All you know is that somewhere below lies complete darkness. Today, that sounds almost unbelievable. Modern bathrooms are among the safest rooms in our homes. We switch on a light, lock the door, flush the toilet, wash our hands. Then we leave without giving it a second thought. For a medieval noble, a servant, a soldier, or even a king, using the toilet could feel very different. Not because toilets themselves were evil, but because everything surrounding them carried risks that modern people rarely think about. Cold, darkness, disease, isolation. Even the castle's own design worked against you. And surprisingly, many of those dangers weren't imagined. They were very real. The strange part is that medieval builders weren't careless. In fact, they were incredibly clever. Their toilets were designed to solve one of the biggest problems any castle faced. A problem every person created. A problem that never stopped growing. And their solution was surprisingly advanced for its time. But that clever design also created dangers nobody expected. Some were inconvenient. Some were disgusting. And a few were genuinely deadly. So before we can understand why medieval toilets became places people dreaded visiting after dark, we first need to understand how they actually worked. Because once you see what was hiding beneath that simple wooden seat, you'll never look at a modern bathroom the same way again. When people hear the words medieval toilet, they often imagine nothing more than a filthy hole in the ground. The reality was far more ingenious and far more unsettling. Castles weren't built in places where plumbing was possible. Many stood on rocky hills, surrounded by thick walls, designed to withstand sieges that could last for months. Everything inside those walls had to be carefully planned. Food, water, weapons, sleeping quarters, even human waste. Because if hundreds of people lived inside a castle, they couldn't simply walk outside every time they needed to use the bathroom. During a siege, opening the gates could mean death. So medieval builders came up with an elegant solution. They built the toilets directly into the castle walls. These toilets were called garderobes. From the outside, a garderobe looked almost invisible. But inside, it was surprisingly simple. A wooden or stone seat rested above a vertical shaft carved into the wall itself. Instead of pipes, instead of drains, gravity did all the work. Everything simply fell downward. Sometimes the waste landed in a pit below. Sometimes it dropped into a moat. Sometimes it collected in cesspits that had to be emptied by hand. Simple, effective, and for the Middle Ages, remarkably advanced. In fact, many castles had several garderobes spread throughout the building. The king had one. The queen had one. Nobles had their own. Servants often shared communal ones. Even soldiers guarding the walls needed places to relieve themselves without abandoning their posts. No matter your rank, everyone depended on the same basic idea. A hole, a shaft, gravity. But that clever design created a problem that modern toilets never have. Everything beneath you remained open. There was no water trap, no sealed pipe, no plumbing separating you from whatever lay below. Just empty space. Imagine sitting above a shaft that disappeared several meters into darkness. You couldn't see the bottom. You couldn't always hear what was happening below. Cold air constantly rose through the opening, sometimes carrying unpleasant smells, sometimes carrying something much worse. And unlike today, there was no bathroom light. If your candle went out, you would suddenly find yourself alone, balanced above a dark hole, unable to see anything around you. Even during the daytime, using a garderobe wasn't especially comfortable. Many projected from the outer walls of the castle that helped carry waste away from living quarters. But it also meant the room was often exposed to freezing winds. In winter, icy air rushed upward through the shaft like a chimney. Imagine sitting there while snow fell outside, stone walls pulling the warmth from your body, wind rising from beneath you, and knowing there was nothing you could do except finish as quickly as possible. Yet medieval people accepted this as completely normal. They weren't constantly complaining. They weren't dreaming about modern bathrooms, because they had never known anything else. For them, this was simply how castles worked. But while the design solved one problem, it quietly created several others. Problems that builders couldn't always control. Because the greatest danger wasn't the cold, or even the smell. It was what sometimes found its way back up the shaft. And that's where medieval toilets became far more frightening than most people imagine. So, what exactly could come back up the shaft? The first answer is the one you'd probably expect. Rats. Medieval castles attracted rodents for the same reason cities do today. They stored enormous amounts of food. Grain, meat, cheese, everything a rat could want. And wherever rats gathered, they searched every possible route, including waste shafts. No, medieval people weren't constantly attacked by rats climbing into their toilets. Stories like that are often exaggerated. But the possibility of animals appearing near garderobes was real enough to make these spaces unpleasant. Birds sometimes nested near the openings outside castle walls. Insects gathered around waste. Flies multiplied during warmer months. The smell alone attracted countless pests. It wasn't a horror movie. It was simply everyday life before modern sanitation. And sanitation itself was another problem. Today, one flush sends waste into an underground sewer system. Out of sight, out of mind. A medieval garderobe had no such luxury. Waste collected below, sometimes in pits, sometimes in cesspools. Sometimes it remained until workers could remove it by hand. Imagine hundreds of people living inside one castle. Now imagine dealing with all of their waste. Without running water, without disinfectants, without rubber gloves. Cleaning a medieval toilet wasn't just unpleasant. It was one of the hardest and least respected jobs in the castle. Workers responsible for emptying cesspits often labored through the night when fewer people were around. The smell could linger on their clothes for days. Yet without them, the entire castle would eventually become unlivable. But despite the filth, disease wasn't always spread the way many people imagine. For years, movies have suggested that medieval cities were drowning in waste every moment of every day. Reality was more complicated. Many castles deliberately built garderobes on outer walls where wine helped carry away odors. Some even positioned waste chutes over flowing water when geography allowed. Medieval engineers weren't ignorant. They understood that waste had to be moved away from where people lived. They simply lacked the technology to do it as safely as we can today. Then there was another danger. One that had nothing to do with dirt at all. Imagine sitting alone, high inside a castle tower. Your candle flickers. Outside, rain pounds against the stone walls. Suddenly, you hear voices below. Not inside the castle. Outside it. The shaft beneath you doesn't just carry waste downward. It also carries sound upward. Every echo becomes louder. Every movement below seems closer than it really is. Was it a guard changing watch? A servant walking outside? Or someone who wasn't supposed to be there? During times of war, that question became terrifying. Because castles weren't invincible. Attackers spent weeks searching for weaknesses, secret entrances, forgotten passages, poorly defended openings. And on rare occasions, the humble garderobe became one of them. One famous story tells of attackers entering a castle through a latrine shaft during a siege, using an overlooked opening as an unexpected route inside. Incidents like this were unusual, not something that happened at every castle, but they were memorable enough to become part of medieval history. It was the kind of vulnerability no architect wanted, yet no castle could completely eliminate. Suddenly, the lonely toilet built into the wall wasn't just a place to relieve yourself. It was another reminder that even behind massive stone walls, complete safety was an illusion. But perhaps the strangest part of all is that medieval people continued using these toilets every single day. Because after a while, even extraordinary dangers have a way of becoming ordinary. And that's what tells us the most about life in the Middle Ages. But here's the surprising part. Despite everything we've talked about, medieval people still used these toilets every single day. Kings used them. Queens used them. Knights, servants, cooks, children. No one was exempt. Because fear has a strange way of becoming ordinary. If you spend your entire life in one world, you stop comparing it to another. A medieval child didn't wish for a flushing toilet because they'd never seen one. A castle servant didn't dream about electric lights because the idea didn't exist. To them, a cold stone garderobe built into the castle wall wasn't unusual. It was simply another part of daily life, just as lighting candles, fetching water, or climbing endless staircases were. That's something we often forget when looking at history. We imagine people from the past constantly suffering, constantly complaining, constantly afraid. But most of them weren't. Human beings adapt. They always have. Medieval families learned which garderobes stayed warmer during winter, which ones smelled less after heavy rain, which castle towers caught the strongest winds. Experience became their guide, not instruction manuals, not plumbing regulations, simply years of living with the world they knew. Today, our bathrooms are among the safest rooms in our homes. We flip a switch. Bright light fills the room. Clean water appears instantly. Waste disappears with the press of a handle. If something goes wrong, we call a plumber. A medieval family had none of those comforts. Every improvement we now take for granted, running water, indoor plumbing, ventilation, modern sanitation, exists because generation after generation solved problems people once believed were unavoidable. The medieval toilet reminds us of something bigger than castles. It reminds us how much everyday life has changed, not through one great invention, but through hundreds of small improvements spread across centuries. Safer buildings, cleaner water, better engineering, better hygiene, things so ordinary, we rarely stop to appreciate them. So, were medieval toilets truly terrifying? Sometimes, not because they were cursed, not because monsters lived beneath them, but because they reflected the world around them. A world without electricity, without modern sanitation, without the safety we quietly rely on every day. The toilet wasn't the real danger. It simply gathered many of the dangers medieval people already faced. Darkness, disease, isolation, cold, uncertainty. And perhaps that's why this story feels so fascinating today, because it transforms one of the most ordinary parts of life into a reminder of how extraordinary our own lives have become. Tonight, when you walk into your bathroom, turn on a light, flush a toilet, and leave without thinking twice. Take a moment to imagine doing the same thing 700 years ago. One tiny candle, a freezing stone room, a dark shaft disappearing into the castle wall, and nothing but silence beneath you. Suddenly, that ordinary trip to the bathroom doesn't seem quite so ordinary anymore.